Hello YouTube. Happy 2025 by the way. Just get that out there. It's the new year. I can't wait to see what this year is going to bring. Mainly because I'm not going to be like hyperemesis sick for the majority of it like I was last year. Obviously new baby great, but pregnancy sickness not great. It wasn't until I was in the shower yesterday and as I looked down at the clumps of hair that were falling out of my head, I realised it's been nearly 4 months. Like, Pia is nearly 4 months old. I gave birth nearly 4 months ago and I still haven't done a birth story of any kind on any platform. Not that you have to, but I love giving birth. I've realised that now that I've done it twice and had two thankfully really great positive experiences. I have to admit I was a little bit hesitant to share my birth story because last time when I talked about my birth I did get a few sort of salty, hateful comments. I think it can be a really contentious issue in motherhood that like one person discussing their positive experience does not in any way, what am I trying to say? Like it's not intended to make anybody feel worse if they didn't have a great experience. Do you get what I'm saying? I kind of felt like, oh, maybe I shouldn't share because I know some people aren't, I don't know, is it lucky enough to have two great births? At the same time then, when I thought about it, I feel like I want to share because I watched loads of positive birth stories when I was coming up to my first labour and they really helped me. And also I just feel like it's good to get it out there. Like labour doesn't have to be some really scary, negative, overly medicalised experience. It also doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be either super strict medical hospital setting having all the like epidural everything, and you also don't have to be woo woo at home birth. And I say woo woo lovingly because I actually feel like I would have quite liked a home birth, but anyway, I digress. You know, you can have a kind of middle of the road regular birth. You can be somebody who has a bit of health anxiety. You can be somebody whose interoception in their body isn't always great, who is prone to panicking. All of these things, you can still have a really great birth, because that was me and I've had two now, so I feel a little bit more confident to say that it wasn't a fluke last time. Obviously I know there are loads of factors that could have made it go differently, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, that's a really long-winded way of me explaining that I'm finally going to share my birth story. I've got my coffee. I've got a blueberry muffin, which I'll probably forget to eat. And then I also am going to do the whole names that we loved but didn't use thing. My birth story, or Pia's birth story. It's her being born, but I was present and had a pretty big part in it. So obviously I am also going to be doing this in reference to my first labour because that's the point of comparison I have. Do you know what I'm saying? My first baby, I do have a birth story on my channel, so you can go and watch that if you want to. It's another sort of positive birth story, slightly different to this one. But my first baby arrived, I went into labour on my due date. She arrived the morning after. Pia was 9 days late. I don't think I was freaking out about being late, and I don't think I was like, oh, I'm really sick of being pregnant, get this baby out of me. But the more that the days went on, I did have that growing anxiety of you're creeping closer to 42 weeks and there are all these sort of expectations that you're going to get the baby out by then, and if you don't you might have to be induced, etc. I'd been offered a sweep at 39 weeks and on my due date. I didn't accept any of them. I spoke to lots of people on Instagram who gave me their experiences of a stretch and sweep, and I just felt like it wasn't necessary for me yet. I think had I gone any closer to 42 weeks I probably would have, just to, you know, as a sort of stepping stone between that and induction, probably would have given it a go. Turns out I didn't need to, so that was great. I was 41 plus 2. Yeah, 41 plus 2. And I actually had a phone call in the afternoon with a follower who she offered her services to me while I was pregnant. She's a trained midwife and she was starting up a business where she was helping people prepare for birth plans, all of that kind of stuff. She said, it's a new business, I'd love to hold your hand through the whole thing and then, you know, you could give a testimonial. And I said, oh my God, that would be amazing. And she was amazing. She helped me with my birth plan. She was just like so on it if I had any questions. It was great. She has currently put her new venture on hold. I think the timing wasn't quite right for her, so if she ever decides to reignite it, I probably will give her a mention either on here or on Instagram because she was so helpful. But anyway, so I spoke to Charlotte. I was feeling really wobbly and I said to her, I just don't really want to have an induction because for me, I wanted to give birth in the midwife-led unit, which is the nearest to my house. It's where I was born. It's where Rue was born, my eldest. And it's just the easiest option for us. I didn't want to have to go to our city hospital, which doesn't have a great reputation. The maternity unit there, I think they struggle and it's really like over, oh my God, this is not a good day for me to film this because I can't even speak. It's really busy. basically, a lot of people. So I personally didn't want to have that happen. And also the induction process there, they had changed it from booking in for an induction and going and getting induced to being put on a list, and then you're given 24 hours notice. So they ring you and say, oh, could we have you in tomorrow? You go in and you might just be on the labour ward for a couple of days. If like other urgent things come up, they might just keep you on hold at the hospital. The sound of that whole process just threw me into a panic. I had a little phone call with her and I was having a bit of a wobble, and we talked through, you know, some of the statistics around going closer to 42 weeks and all of this stuff. She was just trying to help me make the most informed decision that I could. I was feeling really wobbly and tearful, and she said to me, that's actually a really good sign, because quite often when women are feeling wobbly and tearful, they go into labour. And I was like, okay, but in my mind I thought I'm not gonna pay too much attention to that, because if it doesn't happen then I'll be even more wobbly and tearful. It got off the phone with her at about 4:30, went downstairs, had dinner, and then I was in the bathroom. My toddler on the potty, sorry Roo, and I was cleaning the bath, because, you know, sometimes you're just wasting time while they're chatting away doing whatever they're doing. And then all of a sudden my waters broke. It just felt like I'd wet myself, but I knew that it wasn't wee because it didn't feel like weeing. That's the closest way I can explain it. I sat on the toilet because I was right next to the toilet, and I called Alex from the kitchen. I said, I'm pretty sure my waters have broken, could you get my phone? Rang the midwife unit, and the lady said, pop a pad in and just leave it there. It was actually quite nice in a way, because we had this like warning that things were kicking off, so it was all quite orderly, getting my toddler's stuff together, dropping her off at my mum and dad's. We then drove straight to the midwife-led unit, and when we got there she checked the pad and she was like, yeah, that's soaking, that is definitely your waters and not anything else. So she said, okay, now what happens is you go home and you wait for labour to start. And I was like, okay. And then the other thing I didn't realise is that if your waters break first, which I feel like when you're growing up that is traditionally what you see, waters breaking, someone goes into labour, and that's just how it's meant to go. With my first, that didn't happen. My waters didn't break until I was in labour, and the midwife had to pop them for me because she was like, they're kind of in the way. What I didn't realise is if your waters do break, it actually makes everything more complicated almost. The midwife basically said to me that if I hadn't started labour within 18 hours, I would have to go to the city hospital and have the baby there. Like, I would have no choice about that, because I would need to be given antibiotics and they can only be administered by the doctors. I think you have a whole 24 hours before things become worrying, I guess, if your waters are broken early. But 18 hours was the mark that my trust had set in terms of, well, if you haven't gone into labour, you need to go. And even if I was at the midwife-led unit, if I wasn't in the late stages by then, they would then put me in an ambulance and blue light me to the city hospital. So then I felt like the time pressure was on, to be honest. We went home, we sat down, I can't remember what we were watching. Married at First Sight. Yeah, it was Married at First Sight. The midwife did advise me to get some sleep. There is no chance I would be able to fall asleep in that situation, because my brain was literally like, blah, blah. And about 11 p.m, decided to go up to bed. As I stood up, my contractions started. It's weird because when we left the midwife-led unit, I was in my mind thinking, am I even going to remember what a contraction feels like? Which in hindsight is really stupid, because it's like, you don't forget what going for a wee feels like or doing a burp feels like. It just happens, do you know what I mean? And labour is exactly the same. It's just another bodily function. So yeah, as soon as they started, I was like, yes, I recognise that. Compared to my first labour, my early contractions were so much more painful. So we were in my living room, still watching maths. I took 2 paracetamol because it's what I did in my first labour, even though I don't really know if that makes any difference at that point. And I had my labour comb again, and I was on the birthing ball. By 1:30 a.m, I was ready to go in, because you kind of get to a point where you want to, if you've given birth, I'm sure you know what I mean, you go into a very primitive kind of zone. And I definitely moved into that by the time we called the hospital and went in. Got there at 1:45, she checked me and she said, oh, you're 4 centimetres dilated. I thought, there is no way I can be only 4 centimetres. Because with my first labour, I was at home until I was 8 centimetres. So to hear that I was only 4, in my mind I thought, oh my God, I've got so long to go. So many more contractions to go. But the midwife said to me, this is your second labour, so it's going to go a lot quicker. She was like, 4 centimetres the first time round is a completely different world to 4 centimetres in your second labour. So I kind of just tried to take her word for it, because I was on the verge of a breakdown at that point. She was right. That was at like 1:45-ish. Pia was born by 2:45 a.m. She was here. The rest of my labour was quite similar to the labour that I had with my first. I tried the gas and air but didn't like it because I couldn't hold. I was finding it hard to coordinate, and I was finding my comb more helpful, my labour comb. So I didn't use the gas and air. I went in the birthing pool, which was my saviour. I was like on all fours, like leaning on the front of the bath, if you like. That's a nice visual image for you there. And it was so funny because my hypnobirthing came even more in handy this time around. It definitely helped me mentally the first time, but for Pia, like, I basically breathed her out, which I didn't believe that was a thing. So I heard all these hypnobirthing courses talking about it. And with my first labour, I was sort of breathing and the midwife said to me, no, you need to push as if you're going for a poo, which I did. And it got her out. But this time, the midwife who was there, she kind of coached me through it and she said, okay, next time your contractions come, I want you to push. And I would do a little like the down pushing in hypnobirthing if you've done it. And then she was like, okay, next time I don't want you to do any pushing, I just want you to breathe. And so I pushed a grand total of 4 times, according to Alex. And the rest of the times my contractions came, I was just breathing and she was out. And the midwife floated her to me, like through my legs. She came up through the water in a kind of ghostly way. Not that I want to make it morbid, obviously, like there was nothing wrong with her. But like in the moment, it does look bizarre because they're underwater. She floated her up to me and I got her out of the water and she was here. And it was just, I'm actually getting a little bit emotional, which is, there's quite a large chance that I'll never do it again. So I need to stop crying. Get yourself together, woman. I didn't have any tears. I mean, with my first, I didn't have any perineal tears, but I did have grazes at the top which had to be stitched up. This time I didn't have anything. I don't know. I did a video talking about some of the things I did to prep for labour. I will never know whether any of those things were the reason that I had 2 quite positive experiences, but I do think they contributed. I know that hypnobirthing did, especially for like someone with my mindset who is quite anxious or can be quite anxious, and definitely in hospital settings. Like I've fainted at the sight of scrubs before. I've fainted when people have asked me about my periods in hospitals. So usually things to do with the body really freak me out. So just on a personal level, like it feels like a massive achievement. And again, I'm not saying obviously that if your labour doesn't go to plan, it's what's the opposite of an achievement? A failure. I'm not saying that because we all know that's not the case. For me personally, like it was a big thing for me to be able to have done that twice. I feel super, super lucky. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, so I was 9 days over and I wasn't really doing much in terms of like, let's get this baby out. But I was going for a walk every day, or trying to. And also, the day before I gave birth, I had a bath with clary sage. Put some clary sage in some milk, put it in my bath. I have no idea if that actually would have been the thing that helped my labour come on the next day. It was less than 24 hours later. I reckon I had the bath like 8 p.m. the day before, and obviously my waters broke about 6 p.m. the next day. This is completely anecdotal. I have no idea. They do say that clary sage is meant to bring on contractions or strengthen contractions. You're not supposed to use it in pregnancy for that reason. That's the only thing I did that could potentially have had any impact, but I really don't know if that's the reason. I'll never know. You know, she was born on my cousin's birthday. Sorry, Emily. After she was born, we had skin to skin in the birthing pool for a little while, got out, had delayed cord clamping, and she was just on me. She latched super quickly. All of that felt quite smooth. They didn't weigh her for ages, but then when they did weigh her, she was 8 pounds 5. So that was also a pleasant surprise for me, because Rue was 9 pounds 5, and everyone kept saying to me, your second baby's usually bigger than your first. The second baby's usually bigger than the first. So in my head, I was like, Lord save my vagina. She was 8 pounds 5, which is still a big baby, but I don't think that my family makes small babies, to be perfectly honest with you. I was 8 pounds 14, so, you know, big healthy girls. By 7 a.m. the next day, we were leaving the hospital, went to Mackie's drive-through, as is our labour tradition. Went home. Rue came home mid-afternoon to meet her baby sister. I'm glad I recorded it. I don't think I'll ever forget it anyway. I think I could replay it in my head because it was just so, I don't know, I've never seen her so sort of quiet and reverent almost. It was lovely. And she walked in and I said, who is it? And she kept looking at Pia in the sleep nest, and then she was looking at my tummy, and she was looking at Pia and looking at my tummy. It was so funny. The weeks that followed it, in terms of my toddler's behaviour, were insane. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, having her home was really nice, and then we all just kind of got on with it. The first couple of days after she was born, we had torrential rain, and I really did struggle with that because we couldn't get out and about. We couldn't even go for a little walk with the pram, take Rue to the park. It was like driving rain constantly. And then on top of that, the guttering at the back of our house fell down, and we got a massive leak in the roof that came in through Rue's new bedroom. So it felt like that was like really unnecessary stress added by the British weather. So thanks a lot for that, UK. Those things aside, that was my birth story, and it was lovely. And I just want to let you know, if you are pregnant or if you're planning to have children one day and you are not sure how you're going to cope with it, like, trust me, if I can do it and have positive experience, you can do it. And a lot of things are obviously out of your hands, but I think there are certain things you can do to make sure in your mind you're still having that positive experience. I have friends who did hypnobirthing, and even though they had to have an emergency C-section, they still felt like they had a positive experience where they were empowered and they were informed about the decisions they were making and they were in charge of how it kind of went. So just spend a bit of time when you're pregnant getting those ducks in a line, and I hope you have a lovely experience, because labour is up there for me. It's one of my faves. Really, really enjoyed it. Can't say I really recommend, because I guess it's not for everyone, but I personally 10 out of 10 would do again. Someone in this car park opposite looking at me this whole time, and he probably thinks I'm insane. It's 2025, hun. This is what people do. Sit in their cars, eating muffins, talking to cameras. Baby names. We had a really tough time with baby names. We had a boy name. If Rue had been a boy, she would have been Rafi. If Pia had been a boy, she probably would have been Rafi. Even though I think when you think about one name for too long, you can kind of go off it. And because I've been a teacher, there are a lot of names that remind me of children. We had a really tough time with names, to the point where Pia actually did not have a name for the first 10 days of her life. She was just baby, baby girl, baby sister. And it's weird how quickly that becomes like the norm. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that she didn't have a name, which, I don't know, is that concerning? Kind of whittled down a shortlist, and then when she arrived, none of the shortlist seemed to suit her. Some of the names we loved but didn't use. Joni was on my list from when I had Rue, a la Joni Mitchell. My lovely nan, who is no longer with us, loved Joni Mitchell, and as such, I've always just loved that name. We obviously had a bit of an E names thing going on, because I've also got Clemmy on the list. Winnie. Now, I love the name Winnie. My great-grandma is called Winifred, and I've always loved Winnie. It used to be one of my like number one baby names, but I think it's one of those where, because it had been on my list for so long, by the time I came around to actually being pregnant, I kind of wasn't sure anymore. Alex really liked Winnie, and he was fighting for Winnie a lot during Pia's pregnancy. My pregnancy with Pia. He also really liked Billy. I do like Billy. I feel like Rue could have been a Billy. I don't feel like it suits Pia as much. I loved the name Dottie. I also really like Finny. So I would have gone Finny, Finn for short. I love those names that are like a bit androgynous, etc. But Alex just absolutely vetoed both of those. So that was the end of that dream. Both really like B, but I didn't want BEA. I just wanted like Bumblebee. Both really like the name Olive, but one of my cousins has a dog called Olive. I love the name Suki. Indy, I love the name Indy, but again, I know a lot of children called Indy. I also really like the name Philly. So a lot of the names were E names, which just sort of happened by accident. So when she was born, we had this kind of short list of some of those names, and none of them felt quite right. So we then had 2 weeks of experimenting with different names, and our joint top names by the end were Marley, spelt Marli, Nola, I have Irish heritage, and also Sienna, which wasn't one that we'd ever considered, but when we looked at Pia, she kind of looked like a Sienna. Pia was a name that Alex had been kind of championing the whole way through, and I kept saying no because my best friends are called Maria and Ria, and I felt like it was just too much the same, basically. But the more that I looked at her, and Pia is such a beautiful name. It's Italian, it comes from Peter, basically. It means like pious, reverent. I think Pia is a beautiful name, but I just was not sure because it sounded so similar to my friends' names. So I needed to sit with it for a bit and just see if it suited her. I was thinking Nola, Alex was thinking Pia, and the more we looked at her, the more I had to concede that she does look like a Pia. I just think she's a Pia. That's all it is. So yeah, then 2 weeks after she was born, we finally let our family know that that was her name, and that's who she's been ever since. And I'm super happy with it. It's funny because you overthink the baby names all the way through the pregnancy, and then once they're here and the name is theirs, you don't really ever, I don't feel like you ever really consider whether you like it or not. Like, you just don't think about it like that anymore. Now, boy names, like I said, we loved Raffi, Raffi. I love the name Henry, but I don't think we would have had a Henry. Love the name Jack, but I have a brother called Jack and a brother-in-law called Jack, so that's confusing enough already. And I love the name Louis. I think if we'd found out at 20 weeks that we were having a boy, we would have been up shit creek with no ideas, because boy names, I find it so difficult. There are so many more kind of traditional, commonly used boy names, and then not much else, I guess. And I suppose the names that Alex and I go for, they are outside of the very traditional, but they're still quite classic sounding, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one for boys, and I'm not sure if we ever have another baby, which, like I've said, I don't think we will. But if we do and it's a boy, just know I'm going to be really struggling. I've been filming for long enough now, so I am going to go. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to the birth story. If you are coming up to your own labour, then wishing you all the best with it. I hope it's everything that you want. Happy 2025, everyone. And somehow my coffee is still warm, so that's good. Please do give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye.